Right. But here, how do I say this? We're coming into an inflection point where their goal is to reduce hundreds of millions of people to poverty.
Yeah.
And they need a way to engineer that, and they need a way to manage it.
And
what they're right.
Exactly
and that's what they're trying to do, is come up with a model, because remember, they're using our taxes and our retirement savings to engineer it.
Yeah. We're paying to build this prison.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're paying to build it. We're building it. We go to work and we help them build it. But if you look at the economics of what they're doing, because most of the money that's being spent to build this has been accessed illegally through governments. So their management of the government resources has been criminal, and there are massive violations of the law. And the model they're using in terms of where they're going with the existing and the future financial systems, it depends on our resources to engineer this. And that's one of their weak spots. And if you look at the recent discussion by the central bankers, they're very afraid of people figuring out that they are creating inequality and it's intentional, and we're financing it.
Right. I mean, I think up to this point, if we could find an effective way, and it's such a challenge to distill it down,
right.
But the people who are standing on the side of, health, freedom, natural rights, people to have autonomy over what happens to their bodies and their livelihoods, to understand that what is unfolding is beyond the medical passport system, and is, and you speaking of the digital
right.
slavery, but that it is specifically the element of the weaponized social safety net under this, combined with the automation and the panopticon and the robotic shift. Because I find there's not a lot of people out there right now who are making connections between what we were saying, like putting the children in Ethiopia on blockchain for education, and the Israel's green passport that is tied to a medical. But fundamentally, the technology is the same, and their end goal is going to be the same.
So we're going to figure out how to do that today.
Okay, good.
I don't know how we're going to do it, but I know we're going to do it.
Because that would be incredibly powerful, because there are many motivated people, but they don't have the larger schema.
Right. And I think, one of the obstacles to getting the larger schema, and this is one of the reasons I loved your recent interview, and again, we'll put the link up, was when the host says, and I told you, I thought this was the best description I've ever heard of the system. She says, this is some sick shit. And I don't like to use 4-letter words on the Solari Report, but she nailed it. It was so funny. I just cracked up. And,
well, I think, again, if you're someone who has come out of this legacy of understanding the dispossession, and that's the thing, most of the people running the bureaucracy either are coming from places of not necessarily having direct experience, or else having lived through it and gotten the golden ring and been anointed to the managerial class to run it. So all of the people running the machine are incredibly disincentivized to actually deal with the cognitive dissonance of the harm that they're doing. They just want to really believe that what they're doing is helping, and it isn't. And it's increasingly not going to help as we start, mixing it up with biosensors and drones.
On one side, we've got the central bankers, and on one side, we've got individual humans. So call them citizens, call them taxpayers. And they have a completely different vision of, one has a vision of a human civilization, and the other has a vision of livestock management or a slavery system. There are different ways of describing it. And I think, step number one is to face the fact that the visions are so completely, we're sitting here in a very win-lose position. Now, I will tell you that if you've ever studied the slave trade, I believe one of the reasons they canceled it was they couldn't find a way of perfecting collateral. So if you were a bank in London, you financed a group of 100 slaves for a plantation owner at a 50% loan-to-value ratio, and the commodities market went down and the plantation owner sold them west, you had no way of identifying that Harry and Sally were really your slaves and getting them back. Okay. Now with digital technology, you can.
Yeah.
And because you can, I think there is nothing more dangerous than the blockchain. You know, the idea that the blockchain, there's certain things that should not be managed or optimized with price. And to put living things on a blockchain, to me, is exceptionally dangerous.
Well, and the one thing too that I want to encourage people to look into about blockchain, because I think the focus is very much around like the currency aspect, you know, and the finance, but it's ultimately a ledger system that holds currency, but it holds much more. And their idea is like your e-government is to run really your rights and privileges, and it is a token economy that I sort of describe as like living your life in a mother may I game. Right. And the yes you may means that you have this token, and the token is something you've earned either through some work, which there will be less and less of, or behavior or compliance behavior on a pathway or within this larger, you know, medical establishment regime that is coming online. So the spatial web, which is coming, will run on blockchain, and it will be contract law. So right now, the major players in this space are the accounting firms. It's the KPMG, the Deloitte, the Accenture. They're the ones setting the terms of this game because they're overlaying contracts, micro contracts onto everything with the sensors. And that's something I think is not in most people's realm of experience, that the way in which you engage with the physical world will be mediated by these tokens. And acquisition of the tokens will be determined by performing according to this global regime.
And where they're free to extract as much as they want in taxes whenever they want. In other words...
And I think some of it's going to be piezoelectric energy too. I think some of it is actually going to be like, here's your smart mirror, run. You know, here's your smart gym in your house. Power the smart grid.
So let's talk a little bit about what's going on in Africa, because what you're seeing is the systems that they want to use, they're prototyping in a variety of different places.
Right.
And one of the reasons we don't connect the dots is they're prototyping this over there, they're prototyping this over here. You did a very good job in your last interview of describing how the different pieces all over the place, so you can't kind of bring them together. So talk about what's going on in, it's in Ethiopia, correct?
Right. Yeah. So this is, again, we're sort of at this point, I will say, I don't believe that necessarily all of the potential terrible things are going to all manifest, right? Like, I think there is a fair amount of overreach here, and there's a lot of moving parts, and I'm not at all confident, especially when I see some of these, that they can pull it off. So I'm saying this all with the understanding is this is how they talk about it. Right. And that we should pay attention, because these are people who are controlling some of the, militaries and money and other things. It's just not worth putting it aside and saying it probably won't happen. We need to actually know what they're thinking. So Cardano is deploying the largest program of digital identity, government-backed digital identity in the world right now. And so that was about 3 weeks ago. They rolled out, they have an agreement with the Ministry of Education in Ethiopia. And Ethiopia they have in Addis Ababa something called the Sheba Valley, which is sort of the Silicon Valley of the continent of Africa. And so a lot of their high-tech development is happening there. And the Ethiopian Ministry of Education has ties to the British Council. Some of these education programs that they're advancing will be technology-based, because all of the transparency and accountability has to be tracked on blockchain as data. So there are ties in with the Center for Universal Education, with the Council on Foreign Relations, right? In Addis Ababa in 2015, Tedros Ghebreyesus hosted the finance committee for the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Right. So they adopted those in 2015, and then they brought the World Bank and the IMF and the World Trade Organization there to figure out how do we run the money for these deals, which is essentially the rules of this game, this transhumanist hedge fund game that they're calling green and solving poverty. How do we finance it? So that happened in Ethiopia.
So I just have to tell you, forever I'm going to think of this, instead of financing poverty at 1%, how can we finance it at 10% and get government to pay for it?
Exactly. And then you have Jim Heckman saying, how we can do that? We can brainwash toddlers on, with virtual reality and video games. I mean, literally, that's how they're setting it up. And everyone's just saying, oh, we love social emotional learning, because nobody has all the pieces. But so they've got this 500, they plan to put 5 million students and teachers on blockchain. And this is not because, actually, there is a 2-minute clip with Hoskinson, who's the head of Cardano, saying essentially the metadata of all of your digital interactions in the education space will accrue over the course of your life in alignment with the government. So, it's public-private partnership, aligning with the government, deciding who is a good actor, like who is a good actor according to government standards, and then to actually decide who should be allowed to have a job. And that was sort of the end of the clip. He's saying, so this metadata from your childhood, potentially your pre-K experience, will be tracked, granular level data, not only of you, but all of your interactions with your peers and your teachers and computer programs, to decide if you can be trusted to even have a job.
Is there any discussion of the fact that you cannot be deleted from the blockchain?
Well, so I have a colleague that who is the chair of the education committee of the NAACP in San Jose, and she actually presented and was approved at the 2019 meeting in Detroit of the NAACP national meeting to a resolution opposing linking blockchain identity to social benefit systems. To say and part of that was, this was 2 or 3 years ago when she was in meetings hearing, well, we're going to track lettuce, on the blockchain. Now we're hearing it a lot now. So we know if there's an outbreak, which field it came from. And she said, well, but then the lettuce falls off the truck, and gets a little dinged, and then that's tracked. Well, that's one thing if it's lettuce. It's another thing if it's a child. And it's another thing if knowing that these markets in social impact management run on trauma and poverty. So you're going to manufacture harm so you can fix it to make the return. You don't put people on blockchain, and because it is a permanent record, and some of the data can be bad, wrong, incorrect. So nobody's really talking about it. It's all being framed as liberation. Here we are going, ever since I saw there was a video clip of Richard Branson at Necker Island, where he brought all of the blockchain people in, and they're all going to solve global poverty and boot the global unbanked, into the, digital capitalism. And that's what happened in India. That's why they had their Currency reset. That's why they have Aadhaar. That's why they're being targeted for this takeover. This is not liberation. This thing that they're building is not liberation. So anyway, so that's in place. But it's important to know that in Africa, I frame it as it's a military technology. The cloud is a military technology. And it runs on...
The internet is a military technology.
Especially all the cloud computing is. And it runs on minerals, extractive resources that harm the natural environment beyond what happens to human beings. The child labor in Congo and the issues with, the cobalt that is mined there. This is not a future. Creating a digitally twinned future does not come without really profound human costs and environmental costs. So the piece about Cardano, and it's actually being run through something called IOHK, Inputs, Outputs Hong Kong. So again, treating people like, it's total Taylorism, which again is Philadelphia, right? Friedrich Taylor, right? What is our social efficiency? Our mechanization on the assembly line, only we're being assembled. In the inputs, outputs, that's based in Hong Kong. And, they've set it up with labs in Edinburgh, Scotland, and Wyoming, actually. They have these blockchain labs. But they're partnered with Ben Goertzel, who is with Hanson Robotics. So Hanson Robotics, who created Sophia the robot, the humanoid robot that's now a citizen of Saudi Arabia, they have a lab in the Sheba Valley called ICOG's lab. ICOG's lab is under something called OpenCog, which is the AI neuroscience software they're using to try to build these humanoid robot brains, which was originally backed in 2013 by Jeffrey Epstein. So it goes so there are these things where they're actually beyond putting the children on blockchain and surveilling them as data, beyond the hedge fund markets and human capital that will be applied to those children and managing them for a precarious global gig economy with haptic robotics. they're actually going to be feeding those kids data. I can't be sure, but I can't imagine any other reason they would be creating it, into the singularity net, which is what Goertzel has set up, to try to trigger the singularity, to generate all of the impact data from the sensor networks, to teach the machines to be people, to teach the machines to be natural beings.
So let me step back and integrate with the economics. If you look at the learning power of AI, the interesting thing about AI is the guy with the best AI is not the guy with the best software developers. It's the guy with the most data. Right. Yeah. So we're watching a vampire-like sucking sound of various groups of people trying to get as much data as possible. Yeah. So the surveillance is getting beyond invasive and deep because they're trying to digitize everything because they're trying to suck up the data and be the winner in the AI war. And what you're describing is, I liken it to outsourcing your job to India. Mm-hmm. If you can get the human race on software and AI and hooked up to the cloud, then you can get the human race to teach the robots how to do the human job. Things I have believed is that if you look at bringing in robotics, if you had to create a different legal system to manage your robots, it would take many decades longer to implement robotics. But if you can change the definitions of human and how you manage the humans to integrate robotics into the same labor force, and you have one legal system for both,
good point. Yeah,
you save, Alison, I can't describe to you how much money you can save and the speed at which you can operate. And I think a lot of the crazy transgender, things like the different, complex sexes, and by desexing the humans, you can integrate the robots and go much faster as a legal matter. And there's
a lot of framework around equity too. So I don't know if you've seen the Moonshot paper. So the Japan Science and Technology Agency, like they've advanced that by 2050 we're supposed to operate without a physical body and mind in space. Like and that's upon telegraph and telephone, and that's SoftBank and the Saudi money, their innovation fund. So that's nothing to sneeze at if they're throwing this out there. Who knows that they can get there? But that's that they're imagining, and they're framing it as equity and diversity, and also like the neural equity, like neurodiversity too. Which is again not to say that people shouldn't all be able to be cherished as human beings, like with where they are, but if they can create the equity, diversity, inclusion narrative to include robots, right? That we should not, to include cybernetics, to include, human hybrids. You're right. That's a very good point about the legal jurisdiction.
Right.
We don't even know right now if we might be cybernetic given the nano robotics. Like we may not.
So it's much easier if you can change our status to non-person and have everything from a pure human to a cyborg to a robot in the same system. It gets much easier from a legal standpoint. So, and the taxation, remember the whole taxation system works, very much off the labor system. So this gets back to your taxation without representation. I've had billionaire venture capitalists basically explain to me, look, we're not going to use humans anymore. We're going to do everything with AI, software, and robotics. We don't need humans anymore.
But I think they're trying to use the human. Well, one, it's the impact markets, but I think they're trying to use them both to power this new system, to catalyze this new transhumanism.
Well, I would say this: they're planning. They're not sure exactly which way it's going to go, and they're going to manage the process into robotics so that the humans teach the robots and they optimize within the system. In other words, they're going to prototype pure robots versus cyborgs versus humans. What's better for what? They're optimizers, so they want as much juice out of it as possible. But one of the things they know, given technology, they think they can basically engineer all the humans, with rare exception, into a poverty status where they have complete control, and that gives them the ability to extract all the wealth and radically increase their life expectancy without it, making a mess in the general population. Me, this comes down to, do we want to be humans who resonate with each other and all living beings, or do we want to be, captured and resonating with a machine controlled